So today we're going to dive in on our multi-part series of a general overview of Fusion 360 in the different areas for anybody that's a beginner or even an advanced user that may have overlooked some of these steps, as well as common things that I see or that are expressed to me that people overlook inside the software. And I'm going to kick that off none other than creating the design workspace. So it looks like somebody just said hello in chat. It sounds like, can you hear me all right out there? We'll give that a few more minutes, making sure that you guys can hear me okay. I'm assuming you can, but as I said, I'm going to go ahead and kick off a general overview of the design workspace. We're going to do a couple of things, everything from being able to set up how we can set up our sketches, how does that move into a solid, as well as assemblies and things like default settings that a lot of people find to change, and even what happens when you initially upload a file. So kicking this off, as you guys can see, I went ahead and pulled open my latest and greatest version of Fusion, the new license that I initiated yesterday. If you have questions about licensing and data setup, I would suggest you go watch that video. Now, as you're seeing here, is I do have my data panel open, and everything inside of this Fusion 360 is set completely to default from when we started this license yesterday. So the very first thing I always recommend to people is we need to get familiar with the basics, right? For example, saving our file, our timeline down here at the bottom. Again, if you've ever used a CAD software before, the timeline is very important, as well as things like starting in our workflows left to right. Now, for majority of you out there, you're using Fusion from a solid environment. Now, you may use surfaces from time to time. As myself as a machinist, I've done a lot of things that involve patching holes for machining purposes, as well as now lately bringing in things like meshes and 3D scans and manipulating and reverse engineering. We're not going to dive too deep into a few of these other workspaces like sheet metal and plastics currently. I just want to give you guys a very rough start for Fusion and get you accelerated in the software. So what I'm going to do is, very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a left to right workflow or a top to bottom, depending on how you look at Fusion. And as you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and click my create dropdown. And you're going to notice here that we have a new component, create sketch, right? So now I need to make a decision at some point is, do I want to do a single part or do I want to do an assembly? Well, it's a good habit to actually come in and say new component when you're starting to design something, especially if this is going to roll up into an assembly at some point. Now, if I just want to, for this example, create a brand new part from scratch, I'm going to go ahead and create my sketch, and then I'm going to pick a plane. Now, as you can see, Fusion has already started orientating me. I have a grid to my advantage, and I've actually switched from the solid area over to the sketch area. Now, all of this tends to be very easy to use, and I'm going to start to go ahead. We just see you. Oh, can you not hear me out there, Matt? Oh, of course, like a fool, I need to back up because it's on me. As you guys can imagine, I need to change screens here. So let's back up here, get back to a blank slate. Again, as you can see here, my Fusion is open. I apologize, guys. I totally spaced on the basics of jumping from one to the other. And it actually reminds me of all things inside of Fusion. We're allowed to go back and start fresh pretty easily. But the first thing you should really do inside of Fusion is you should actually hit the save button no matter what you're doing, because we probably want to refer to this as whatever we're working on. I like the nomenclature part for our first thing because we're going to design one part inside of Fusion 360. Matt, so I see how often are we going to be doing these live videos? I don't know. The more people that show up and the more people like, comment, and tell me they want more of this, I'm more than happy to provide as much as you guys like, because I thoroughly do enjoy making this content in a live environment, especially because you guys get to see my screw-ups. Not to say yesterday was a total fail, but it was close. But it helps actually inspire a lot of people to understand that even an expert like myself has ways to work out of certain situations. So I'm going to go ahead and save here for my part A. And as I was instructing all of you, is I need to go ahead and create my sketch and pick my plane. Now, this is probably the first thing I see in design that people struggle with, is the ability to treat Fusion more inaccurately than accurate on the front side. If you're somebody that came from somewhere like AutoCAD or another CAD software, is everybody wants to be precise in the front. Now, in my case, I'm actually going to be precise in the rear, and I like to refer to this as modeling clay. So if I wanted to do an L bracket, as I was discussing before you guys could see this, is I'm actually going to create my sketch with a couple of rectangles. Now, as you're seeing me do here is I'm just dragging out these rectangles to be able to define a rough profile of what I want. Now, this L bracket shape, again, I can come back and dimension this at any time. Again, we're not going to dive super deep into this because I just want to point you all in a direction that helps get you started, because I do have other content out here for design called CAD for Cam. I'm also happy to work with you one-on-one and see what it is that you're trying to design, or how we could make videos like Matt is asking to go out to the community and present this so that all of you can learn. So as you guys can see right now, I'm in the metric system, or as some of us might say, the system that never gets you to the moon, right? We're going to go ahead and type in this case, I'm just going to say 12IN. So again, this is a tip for a lot of you, is you actually have that ability to go out and type whatever increment that you want in order to force into Fusion, even though this entire sketch area is set in millimeters, right? So one thing I can do is I can actually switch my document settings at any time. As you're going to see is I'm going to go ahead and go up here to my document settings. Unit is now going to get switched out to inch. And if I would like, I can actually set that as my user default. So the next time we open a file inside of Fusion 360, as you'll see here, my document settings have automatically imported as inch. So if I was to rinse and repeat on this new file, again, as you guys are going to notice, I don't pertain to worry about world coordinates or what plane I'm actually sketching on with my first sketch. But the idea is that I could now come in and I could drop those same rectangles, again, dimensioning these rectangles to get whatever those dimensions are that we're going to use. Again, it's a little overkill, but I think you guys are starting to see that the value is here, that you can change things on the fly and you can update things on the fly to make it much easier to use. So let's go back to that part A, right? So I'm going to close my second file out. We don't need to save that. Now, I could dimension this as much as I want. Again, we're getting what's called an over-constrain there. And the reason why I'm getting an over-constrain, this is a common problem that a lot of people have. Well, the reason why I'm getting that is because what is happening is these lines are considered horizontal to each other, and they're marked with horizontal vertical constraints. So I can't actually set 90 degrees here because it currently thinks everything is parallel and perpendicular to one another. So again, as you see, if I try to be too crazy with things and start to dimension certain areas, I get that over-constrained type of sketch. Now, I can remove constraints at any time. So if we go ahead and remove a couple of these constraints, and I go back and add that dimension in another time, as you're seeing, I have that full ability to set that to whatever I want based on those constraints being removed. Now, a common good practice. So what did oh, great question, Matt. So what I actually did there is I actually just clicked on the constraint itself. So if I go in and I click and then I held control and I clicked the second one, again, it's not necessarily means these two are actually constrained to one another. But as you're seeing is I can highlight those constraints and hit my delete key on my keyboard and get rid of them. If you were to highlight them again and right click, you have also delete in this pinwheel, which is a very handy tool. So if you guys were looking for some real quick hotkeys, is if you right click, you actually have a quick menu that populates things that you've used in the past at the 12 o'clock position, or some suggestions as we're moving through this. So again, I removed that constraint because my sketch was over constrained. I can come back and add maybe an angular dimension, let's say 93 degrees. And as you're seeing here is I have that ability to go through and actually add additional dimensions to what's going on. Now, if I wanted to, when we initially drew this, we can go ahead and window select. I'm going to get rid of it completely. We could have did the same thing with the line function. But a common thing that I tell a lot of my customers is once we're done with this sketch, and you guys will figure this out, is the sketch really doesn't matter because we're going to turn a sketch into a model. We're going to turn a model into a drawing, which I'm going to do drawings in a different segment. But as you can see, I still could have sketched an L bracket with just some standard straight lines, right? I always joke to my customers when I'm designing a part, a lot of it is nothing more than rectangles and circles. And as a lot of you are going to find out, there is additional tools hidden inside of here. As you're going to see, you know, if I had to do a slot tool or a slotted a curve, they're very straightforward, and you're seeing these tooltip menus pop out. So what I always ask people is try to draw roughly what you want, right? So again, is now that we've created that L bracket, I may not like the placement of this actual line. And this is where my constraints come in. I don't need to try to dimension this line to here, because what's going to happen is we're going to get an angular dimension, right? And I can't actually set a 0 degree angle here. So what we need to do is we need to make things parallel to one another. So we have a lot of different constraints, and I'm not going to run through all of these, but as you're going to see here is everything from horizontal, vertical, which would be lines or 2 points. So we could say horizontal, vertical, these 2 points. And as you saw, that snapped up and turned black. This reminds me that the black lines tend to signify that that is a fully constrained line. Could have did the same thing here, as we could have went in and we could have said parallel. Now, the effects of parallel are kind of interesting. So as you saw, I clicked that lower line, then I clicked the upper line, and it snapped up to it. But as you're looking at some of these other constraints here, these are all our actual perpendicular constraints. So perpendicular versus parallel, it forced that line up into place. Now, if I didn't have certain constraints in place, those constraints came through automatically when I did some of those sketching of right angles. Is if we were to go back and say, now I want to make these 2 lines parallel, notice how it actually brought that down versus bringing the other line up. So we could fix this and remedy this again if we wanted to go in and say, you know what, this corner here is perpendicular. As you see, that snaps up. But if we were to start to grab points and move things around, this is where I always try to get people to think, if the lines are not black, that means they are unconstrained. Again, this is something that a lot of people run into, where maybe this is the shape that you wanted, but your sketch isn't fully locked down yet. Why does that matter? Well, we're going to come back to this sketch here in a second. But if I went back into my actual solid workspace, again, I said finish sketch. And if you guys didn't catch that, you have that ability to go down to your sketching area. Again, I have finished sketch down here on the bottom right in the sketch palette, or I have finished sketch up here at the top to be able to get out of it. But I could actually say extrude. And what you're noticing, because I have this one boundary, is it's automatically selecting that boundary for me to extrude that profile. Now, if this was what I was going for, and I ended up having some issues with this, is I don't like the way it fits, I need to manipulate it, some crazy things can actually happen. So what's funny is if I turn on the sketch here, you can now see that sketch in the background. I can actually move this around. Again, I've seen this a lot where somebody may have created a design, their sketch isn't black, which means fully constrained, and what that has triggered is the ability for that sketch to still move, which could actually cause tolerancing problems, change your shapes and profiles. So we want to go back and we want to fix that. Well, there's a couple of ways to do so. We could go over here to the right where our sketch area is. I can right click and edit sketch here, or I could go down to the actual toolbar where the sketch is in my actual timeline, and I can edit the sketch here as well. So let's go ahead and throw another perpendicular constraint in here. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to give this just a few more dimensions, as you guys have seen me do before. And because I redid everything from scratch, my document units actually went ahead and changed back to millimeters. So let's go back to inch. And again, maybe this time we want this to be 3 inches tall. This is going to be 1. And what you're seeing now is everything is shrinking down to scale as I'm adding those dimensions. And on this side, let's just go with a simple 0.5. Now, I can drag these dimensions and put them wherever I want. Again, this is not a super critical thing when we're inside the sketch area. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit Finish Sketch. What you're going to notice is our L bracket has kind of changed pretty dramatically. So let's look at this isometrically. Again, we have the ability to always change things as we go, right? So I'm going to go down to my extrude, and I'm just going to double left click, opening up that extrude. And as you're going to see is I'm going to shrink this back down, that maybe this bracket's going to be 2 inches wide. So as you've seen off one sketch and one single extrude, I've been able to create this body off of what we're going to manufacture. Now, what I've done here also is some of you may be very, very entertained and much like things like fillets and chamfers and things of that nature when you're modeling. Now, I always recommend to not do fillets at the sketch level. And the reason is sometimes when you go in with a fillet and you go ahead and fillet a corner, you're actually going to break the constraints on this part. In this case, we haven't broke a constraint because this rectangle isn't tied into anything. But if I was to go through and create, let's just say a 3 by 1, and what you're seeing me do here is I'm actually dimensioning in real time, where I use the tab key on my keyboard to jump between dimensions. But I'm going to go ahead and create that fillet on this corner. And again, as you're noticing, I now have a warning. Constraint and dimensions removed because we've taken away that corner to the part. So now it's having a little bit of a problem. This is why I prefer not to create fillets at the sketch level. And you'll see why here in a minute as I back everything up. If you're wondering how I'm undoing things, it's nothing more than Control-Z on the hotkey menu. Up here at the top, you also have an undo button if you ever want to back out of whatever you're doing. So we've created a simple sketch. We've extruded a simple sketch into a part. Now, if I did want to start adding things like chamfers and fillets, this is where we would jump from something like the Create tab, because again, we've already created our body now. And I'm going to go over to the Modify tab. Now, the Modify tab is where we can actually do things like you were seeing there, is I want to add a 400 fillet to this corner. Now, this is going to look a little funky, and again, this is something I see all the time. We've accidentally left that sketch on because we had to turn it on at one point. We could always go back over to the left in our design tree and turn that off. But as you can see, I can very quickly add a fillet. I can actually add multiple fillets in one shot. So if I go down to my timeline, maybe that first edge that we selected is 400. I'm going to add additional edges. So let's say we want to do these two edges up here, and I want that to be 250. As you're seeing is I've now created, fillets up at the top, a little bit of a tombstone feature, whatever the plan is with what we're doing up there. Same rule applies for the ability to create chamfers. Maybe, on this part, I want to create a chamfer all the way around the backside of this part, and we're going to give it a 20 thou edge break. Again, I have that ability to always go back to my timeline and change things. So if you're getting familiar with the CAD side of Fusion, as you see, once we get that body created, once we create the geometry, the shape we wanted, we have that ability to go back and edit these different designs and shapes. So again, very simply, that is a very quick walkthrough and an overview of nothing more than how a simple sketch can be turned into a body. Now, that body at a single body in a single file is considered what we call components. Now, it's also a nice way to think about it. It's an individual part, right? It's a part inside of itself, so it's just one part. If we wanted to start doing things with a little different thought process of, hey, I would like to design a part in an assembly format. There's one quick tip that we need, and I tell you guys, I miss this all the time because my brain is usually moving faster than my hands can move. And that is if we start a new file, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to call this Assembly A. And now from this Assembly A, and again, what you guys are seeing here is I can actually place this anywhere I want. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this one into the Customer B folder. But the difference is going to be we're now going to start designing, but we're going to use a component to separate and organize our files. So I see a question from Matt out there. He's asking about bodies versus components, and you're going to see the difference here. So looking at part A, our sketch here sits all the way up here at the top level. But if we wanted to start doing things in an assembly type of format, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this component, create new component. I'm actually going to click this 3 dots, and I am going to pin this to my toolbar. Now, a lot of people kind of laugh when I do this, and I drag it all the way over here as the very first marker. And the reason why I do this is so that I remember component before sketch, right? So we're going to create a new component, and this is actually going to be now part B. And the parent to this is going to be the top level. So we're going to put it under the Assembly A. And I'm going to create another component after that. So as what you're seeing me do here is I'm more or less kind of separating and creating almost like a file inside of a file for organizations. I'm also need that to be part C. Again, I don't want this to retain it under part B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to the assembly. And as you're seeing now is part C and part B both fall under Assembly A, right? So let's say we want to design part B. So I'm going to go ahead and activate this. Again, this is very important. And watch what happens when I click my Create Sketch. As I click that Create Sketch, it's going to place the sketch underneath Part B. So again, I don't care so much about what plane I'm sketching on. Now you see that sketch is populated under Part B. And I like simple shapes like a circle. And then I'm going to use the hotkey E. And this is where I'm getting more and more familiar with Fusion to quickly create a shape, right? So now, as Matt kind of asked, we have a body and we have a sketch, which means our timeline and kind of our history to this part is now residing under a component. Now, if you look down at the bottom of my screen, you can see we have our sketch and our extrude. If I go back up to the top and I activate the entire file or the assembly or even a sub-assembly, depending on your workflow, what you're noticing here is we created a component, we created another component, and those are auto-highlighting on the left, and then we started to work inside of our component. So again, we can rinse and repeat. I go to Part C, let's create a sketch right here on top of the flat of this cylinder. Again, I'm going to do a rectangle, and now what you're going to notice here is we're going to get the options for rectangle over here on the right that we can change. So if you guys didn't know this, let's go ahead and back up, is when you go to create your sketch, and this time I'm picking a plane off of a body. And now if I wanted to go to the traditional workflow of create rectangle, you notice how I have these three options here. Well, I could easily go down to center rectangle, or as you're seeing here in real time, I'm now doing a 2-point, 3-point, or a from center rectangle kind of feature. Now, some of you may ask me how I got there even faster. This is, again, we're looking at the luxury of hotkeys. Fusion has the ability to actually tell you what the hotkey is right here, which is R for rectangle, C for circle, and L for line, which you will abuse all the time. I'm pretty sure I'm missing C for circle on my keyboard because it's worn down so much. So again, we hit R for rectangle. I go ahead and grab my center point. I'm going to drag this out. And what you're going to notice now, this is the first time we're kind of encountering a multi-area kind of sketch. So if I extrude this, what you're seeing is I have both that outside profile and that inside profile that I'm needing to select. And because it's not one more or less area or boundary, Fusion's not automatically picking up on that. So let's go ahead and pull this out roughly 1 inch. Again, we're creating a new body. And as you can see, if I activate everything at the top level, I now have exactly that, right? So I have two different bodies completely pointed in the wrong direction, and those bodies are residing in two completely different components here. Again, when we're thinking about our timeline, we're thinking about our history, all we've done so far is we've created a sketch, extruded, created a new sketch, extruded. We did so with the correct component active. But let's take that one step further, right? Let's go back to B. Let's add our fillet around the top again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go down to C. And in the case of C, we're actually going to put a chamfer on C. And we just need this for visual representation in our timeline. Now going back up to assembly and activating everything, I am now going to take a momentary pause because, again, if you guys like this content, feel free to hit like, subscribe to our channel, leave comments on things that you would like to see. But I'm also going to show you how to turn off this pesky grid that always seems to be in the way for me. I do not like the grid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to the bottom, and this is where we have control over the visuals in the environments. And I'm going to go to the sketch grid, and I'm going to turn out layoff grid off. And then I don't like to snap to grid. That's my personal opinion. So as you can see now, my part is much easier to see. And without a grid, it tends to take me out of that mindset of, what plane am I working in? Because it really doesn't matter what plane you're working in. And even when we get to the cam side of Fusion, the plane no longer matters, right? So again, we've reactivated our assembly. We look down at our timeline. Again, we created a component, sketch extrude, and then we added the fillet, then we added the chamfer. What you can notice here is we're seeing the whole timeline. But if I jump to any one of my individual components that are rolling up into that assembly, it actually streamlines that history down here at the bottom strictly to that component. Now, as you guys are watching this, again, this is rudimentary circles and rectangles. I get it. But these are the fundamentals that it takes to advance your skill set to be able to move up to bigger and better things, right? You can't draw a whole car without drawing one bolt of that car. How you go about applying that bolt in assembly, there's another option you could do. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to take this up one level more. And I'm going to go ahead and activate the top level. And I'm going to go ahead and pop open my data panel. Well, we did design part A. So let's go ahead and just click and drag part A into this assembly. Now, I am going to move this up and out of the way so we can see it in real time. Now, notice here that there is no part. And this is why I personally hate but love doing this stuff live. And the reason for that is because we did all of this work on part A, right? We created the sketch, we extruded it, we added all these features, and we never hit save, right? We saved it initially, we haven't saved it since. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And what you're going to notice is one of the neat tricks of Fusion is we've now actually brought an external part into our assembly, right? And I'm going to get the warning here. And this warning says that, hey, something has changed on one of your linked files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click this little symbol up here at the top. And just like that, magically, that part has now popped inside of this design. And it's also there for us to reference in any way we want. Now, the neat thing about that is you're going to notice is I can't activate this part, but I can do what's called an edit in place, which is a super neat thing. So this is something that's linked. Maybe you're buying a McMaster car part. It's a bolt. It's not going to change. Maybe you're bringing in some work from somebody else. Maybe a couple of us, maybe me and Matt are working on two separate sub-assemblies, right? We use that car idea. I'm designing the wheels. He's designing, the engine, right? Well, we're bringing that into this file and we're linking things, allowing us to make changes and push those downstream as well. So what you're seeing here is a warning that just saying, hey, you're editing a file. And when you're hitting save, it's going to push out those changes. Notice how my timeline once again changed down here at the bottom, meaning if we wanted to change, as you guys have saw me, maybe a little bigger fillet here. Maybe we make this fillet a little bigger. Again, I'm going to now finish that edit in place. And I'm going to hit save. So as you're seeing here, again, we're going to get a little different version of the save than we saw before. If you didn't catch my video yesterday, we have that ability to add descriptions. Let's just say this is the build up for testing. And now what's going to happen is we're going to actually change versions, but we're going to change versions externally as well. So you're going to see this file for part A. It's going to roll up to a different version as well. So with that linking, you do have to be careful because if we were concerning ourselves with bringing in the latest and greatest or pushing out those changes, we want to make sure bad things don't happen. Now, what did happen as you're seeing here is I did get this little padlock on my part. So if I was externally working on this, and let's take Matt again, I like picking on Matt. He was to push out to me a change to that file that I have open. I now need to bring through the latest version of that design. So again, as you saw, that giant fillet has came through, as well as those external fillets. Now I'm going to pause real quick because I see another question coming in. So it looks like changing part A and saving would change everything in the other file if you patterned it out for machining multiple parts at a time. Correct, Matt. So one of the things about this is you may actually have a linked file, but I'm going to show you a couple other things here. This is more on the front end, right? A linked file in most cases is something already designed, right? Something that really doesn't need those changes, right? We're going to bring that in. We can keep it linked. I always like the idea of nuts and bolts and hardware because you really don't modify that, right? If you need a different bolt, you would bring in a different file. But now that they're inside of Fusion 360 or we're linking them, we could actually go to that original file, as you said, and I'll show that. I'm going to make a note on my end. I'll show that when we start looking at the CAM side of Fusion on patterning out those individual parts. But let's go back to our assembly. Again, this is a two-way connection. This two-way connection allows a push-pull method to an external resource that could still be working on. Maybe I have a couple of specs like a bolt pattern to work off of, and then they're going to design, again, I like the idea of the wheel, right? I'm going to design the brake assembly and upright suspension components, and somebody's going to design that wheel entire configuration. We're kind of working from the inside out in both directions. Now, let's say I don't want something to be linked. Oh, here we go. So Deep Thinker has just asked if we have a team member that's set up as a viewer, will they see the changes live? Yes. So this is a super neat thing. So you guys kind of saw this in real time, right? So as you saw me hit save and put in those notes build up for testing, we did roll up from version 1 to version 3. We would have put a milestone in there. It obviously would have documented a milestone. But if somebody was on the viewer, they would get the actual notification that something changed. And if you're on the online viewer, you would have to hit refresh to bring that through, of course. But now, again, if I'm in the desktop install, as you guys saw that in real time in part A, it did notify me that there was a change and the changes needed to be brought through. Now, again, rolling back to this assembly, I'm going to show you a quick trick here. So let's say I bring in some things that like I do an amazing video on my channel, which is why you guys should subscribe, about making a parametric vise for machining, and we bring that in. And the first thing we do is we actually break that link. Now, breaking this link is going to cause it no longer to push our data back and forth to that external file. Again, I now have full range, as you can see here. If I activate this part, I'm no longer doing edit in place. I can even expand out that history of that part to be able to manipulate this in real time with never actually pushing something back to the original file. Again, this could be a dumb solid. It could be a placeholder. You know, maybe the bolt is too long and we're going to machine it down. Well, I could bring it in and then we could change the specs of that bolt, right? And if we look at our whole history here, as you're seeing, again, I hate to run through it from the top, but we created a couple of components, sketches and extrudes, threw some fillets and chamfers here and there, and then we brought in a new component, right? So there's a new marker in my timeline, and then the history that corresponds to when that was brought in and what was happening. Now, one neat thing is I do have the ability in certain scenarios is to rearrange my timeline. Now, this is very important. I always tell people, pay attention to your timeline. It is very key. You do not need multiple sketches in the same direction of view. We see that a lot, and it does tend to chug down Fusion because it has to calculate each step along the way. But if I wanted to actually make my timeline a little prettier, I can always grab these features, and as you're noticing, I click and drag that fillet to the left. So I changed my timeline in real time, where it now is as we sketched that part, we extruded it, and then we threw the fillet on it. So this is something that's very unique to Fusion, is I have that ability to manipulate my timeline. Again, as you saw me do, I just drug that fillet all the way to the end of my timeline. So depending on what I've done and where I've done it, this could affect how my additional drawings all turned out. And I'm going to show you guys an example of this, right? So let's say when we extruded this block, you're going to notice I clicked one of the faces and I get the 3 lines of when I've extruded this. Now, I could go in knowing that part, activate it, then track it down this way, but I have that real world scenario of being able to click that extrude. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this part over and I'm going to hold my control key because I no longer want to pick this inside area, right? Now watch what happens when I hit OK. You know, again, it's going to downstream affect anything that may be caused by that. But what's really going to happen is we're actually going to reverse what we've done here, right? So again, as we do have that fillet all the way around the top here, because again, as I filleted this, or not fillet, chamfered, I chamfered the entire face. I didn't chamfer just an edge, which means that chamfer now shows up because it sees a hole there in the face. But let's say I'm going to actually grab my timeline and I'm going to roll my timeline back to a known location. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to add an additional fillet to this lower profile, and I'm going to bring this in. And now what you're seeing is when I hit OK, nothing has changed based on what we've done, but as I drag that back down the other way, again, based on how our timeline was built, notice how this OD of this shape still matches the OD of my part. Now, if I was to take, for example, when I extruded said part, I can change and manipulate how that part is drawn and designed. So as you play with your timeline, again, at first, it's not a big deal to be self-conscious of what's going on, but the more you get in there and the more you do, the more problems you could cause at the end of the day that could affect, and in this case, you guys are seeing that the hole has disappeared by nothing more than me reorganizing when that fillet was put on the part. And we're going to go ahead and drag that a little further back and see if we can't reset things. And if we can't reset things for demonstration purposes, we're going to hit Control-Z until we get back to the beginning, right? So again, we have that ability to create an assembly. We could also do a sub-assemblies. So to show you guys a sub-assembly real quick, we're going to go ahead and say this is sub-assembly. And as you're seeing, we're going to make sure the parent up here at the top Now, I don't need to activate it. We could leave it unactivated, which means it doesn't automatically click the active button. But I'm going to create another component, and this is going to be now part D. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and place that in the subassembly. Again, not necessarily needed to be active, but as you're seeing, the moment I have placed a component inside of a component, we have actually changed that component to give you this kind of Tetris block layout that is an assembly now, which now assembly, subassembly rolls up into another assembly. We may have, again, parts that sit up here at a higher level, right? This is the transmission sitting inside of the frame of the car. Scenarios like this to build it up. Now, Matt, you did ask a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because I completely spaced off thinking about a scenario where what happens when we design something in an assembly and we actually want to send that out for manufacturing, right? It's not a big deal had we stuck with our original plan of an individual component or a part file, right? Now that we're in the assembly world and we've designed all this crazy stuff that we want to manufacture, how do we push that out to the shop floor? Well, the cool thing here is I actually have what's called a derive. Now, a derive is different than linking your file. As you guys saw me insert that inside of this file, we did break that link. But if I say derive, it is prompting me to save everything real quick. So we're going to go ahead and hit save. Now, I want to push this file out, right? So if I take the slug as if I was going to go get it machined and turned down, again, I'm selecting the object. Now, I could go over here to the left, and I could pick that based on the entire component. What you're seeing is it's going to bring my body. It's going to bring my sketch and everything with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And just like that, we popped out another file, right? We're getting a little different symbol. This symbol here is called the derive symbol. Derive is a one-way direction, right? So you guys saw with the linking, I could edit the main file. I could edit and place inside the assembly. Well, with derive here, we're going to go ahead and hit save. I like to say manufacturing at the end just so we know what's going on. But as you can see here, this is now actually linked again. It's linked back to the design, but it's only linked in a one-way direction, right? So if I was to come into this part and I was to actually delete that fillet, we look down at our timeline, we have this lovely little delete symbol. But yet, for some reason at the assembly level, the engineer may actually go in and let's add a hole to this. Something simple. We'll go ahead and activate B. We'll pop a hole in the end of this, and we're going to throw that on center, right? So now we're going to go ahead and save this entire assembly. Again, it's going to roll everything up to the next version that's linked to it. And if we go into our customer folders, I think I stored this all under customer B. So as you're seeing, again, our assembly has rolled up to another version. And then with that being said is in the derived part, downstream effect, right? We're getting an update to this part. Again, I pull that update through. Even though I deleted that face, it's brought the latest version of part B in, which you can now see that hole popped in the bottom of it. So if I was manufacturing this part, Matt, this is where I could go do my pattern, my setups, all the crazy stuff downstream. But this allows me to keep the latest and greatest version from my engineering team or my customer with manufacturing. So as you guys can see, it is very straightforward to get into the sketching side of Fusion. Again, I like to tell people, treat it very simple, create simple sketches to get simple part profiles, and then do things such as modifying them to add your fillets and chamfers or additional features as you're working with it. But before I let you go, apologize for that. We had a little bit of a wild dog barking. But before I go ahead and let you guys go, I'm going to point you in another direction. And this is probably the most overlooked part of Fusion when it comes to either design, cam, or anything, is setting your preferences to what your best settings are. So as you can see here is I can pop open my preferences. I can go through and set anything and everything. And one of the things that I think most people miss is this. This is very key. So the very first one is setting your actual button layout. Now, I don't know how much Autodesk is going to like this, but I personally prefer the SolidWorks button layout. And what that means is my middle mouse button allows me to orbit around my part and twist my part. Now, for some of you, you're going to pan and move with that middle mouse button, and you can use things like hotkeys like Shift and Control to cause other effects. Me personally, I like the SolidWorks hotkey. Now, if I wanted to go through the design side of things, I have the ability to turn on different features for different scenarios. I'm not going to walk you through all of these. I'm just going to point out a few of the easier ones that I think most people overlook, which is going to be your default actual units down here at the bottom. So we can go to design and we could set it to inch here, or as you saw when I changed it the first time. I could also go to my manufacturer area and we could set this one to inch, but I'm going to leave it for millimeters so that when we do some cam work, you know, I can change it in real time. Oh, it just bumped my camera here. Let's go ahead and get that camera set back up. Good thing we're getting to the end of the old video. And from this, you can also go through and you can set additional settings. Again, there's going to be settings for just about anything and everything. If you guys have any questions about settings, feel free to leave comments down below or email me with the links. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go for the rest of the night. You know, we are closing in, I think, on the 30-minute mark. Actually, we were up to about 40 minutes with this video. We are going to do another live stream again tomorrow at 5. I haven't quite decided what area we want to cover, but it will, of course, be another informative area inside of Fusion. If you guys are enjoying this content, please leave any type of comment down below, like, follow, and subscribe. If you want to support this channel and you're not currently one of my customers, you're looking to buy Fusion, feel free to reach out. As jitcadcam, we are an Autodesk reseller and we can support your needs, as well as custom one-on-one training and additional support once we talk more CAM. Now, if you don't feel the need, or maybe you're one of those guys out there on a hobbyist license and you're just getting new to this and you're not ready, or maybe even a startup, you're more than welcome to also use the link down below to buy me a beer because, well, my wife can't say no to me drinking a beer that somebody else bought.